Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on cyber society, comparisons of approaches to cyber society between Europe and Japan. My name is Leonidas Karabiperis, and I'm the head of the Science and Technology section of the EU delegation here in Japan. And very grateful first to the organizers of Science Agora, JST, Miraikan, for having accepted our proposal to hold this session here and having elevated it to a keynote session. We thank them very much. My greatest thanks, of course, go to the panelists here and the moderator. I have to apologize that Professor De Gelder from Maastricht University, unfortunately, she cannot be here because she was held back by an airline strike. We're very sorry for that, but I know that the time will be usefully filled by the other participants here. Many thanks to Philippe Condonier, who is the director of CNRS here in Tokyo, both, of course, for having accepted to moderate this exciting session, but also for having provided support for one of the participants here in the panel. I'm very pleased to see my colleague Nicole de Vandre from back in the Commission. We've been together for many years, over many, many years, because my headquarters is also the Commission, so thank you for being here. And then, of course, we would like to, Philippe will introduce all the other speakers, Professor Hashimoto, Professor Shatila, Professor Kita, Professor Kitano, and Professor De Gelder. Have I said everybody? Yes. So, without taking any more time, I would like to pass the floor and the microphone to Philippe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonidas. So let me first briefly present this panel discussion. It will be decomposed in somehow two subsessions. The first one will be devoted more on the connectivity and maybe hyperconnectivity in the current and future cyber society. So we'll talk more about Internet of Things, ubiquitous society, and these kind of things. So with the first two speakers, Nicole de Vandre and Hiroaki Kitano, and then we'll focus more on robotics and not only the technical aspects, but more, let's say, the societal and ethical aspects of robotic research and its impact on the society in the real world, let's say. Let me therefore introduce the speakers. Nicole de Vandre is advisor at the European Commission, more specifically at the DG Connect, which is, let me find, the Directorate General for Communication, Networks, Content and Technology. And she has been studying applied physics, engineering and economics at University of Louvain in Belgium, and also philosophy. And she has been concerned since she's with the Commission since the 80s about some issues linked to science, so women in science, and also science in society, and especially the digital revolution that happened in the last, let's say, 30 years, and its impact on society. Hiroaki Kitano is probably well known about our Japanese audience. So he's the president and CEO of Sony Computer Science Lab, also president of System Biology Institute, professor at Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, and also director of the Laboratory for Disease Systems Modeling at RIKEN. So he has many sites. Maybe more specifically, I would say he's well known to be one of the pioneers in robotics with the Pinot robot in the late 90s, and also one of the pioneers in systems biology. So these two aspects, I think, are very interesting. And also, he has another side which is more artistic. He received some prize at Ars Electronica, also at the Venice Biennale. So he's very interesting in this aspect, also for the impact on society. Then we have Professor Hashimoto, from Waseda University. So Professor Hashimoto is a professor at the Department of Applied Physics. And he's also Senior Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Waseda University. He has been the director of the Humanoid Robotics Institute at Waseda University, which is a very well-known institute in robotics, very pioneering since the 70s, the research on humanoid robots, like the Wobot and Wobot 2 and all these strange machines. He is a very respected pioneer of robotics in Japan. Then from France, we have Dr. Raja Chatila, who is a researcher at CNRS, so the French National Center for Scientific Research, and he's the director of a robotics lab at a joint lab between CNRS and University Pierre et Marie Curie in downtown Paris. Before that, he has been a researcher in Toulouse in another CNRS lab called LAS. For those of you who know robotics, also very famous for research in robotics in the last 30 years. And also, I have to say one thing, sorry, I forgot. So he's also the coordinator of a report that was published by the some ethics commission in France on the ethics for robotic research. So he's not only a researcher, but also concerned with the impact and the ethical issues of working with robots and the impact of those robots in the society. Alas, this report is only available in French for the moment, so I don't think you can read it, but maybe you can give us some hints about that. And our last speaker is, sorry for that, is Minao Kukita, who is associate professor at Nagoya University. He's associate professor at the Graduate School of Information Science at Nagoya University, and he received his PhD in the field of philosophy. And he has been working on the relationship between philosophical issues and science, and especially digital revolution and digital societies. So maybe without further delay, we will start the first part of the session, of the panel discussion, with the first two talks by Nicole Devantre and Hiraki Kino. So Nicole, if you can come, and I will show you your slides. Okay.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you, Leo, to give me this opportunity to share with you my thought as advisor for societal issue in DG Connect on this important issue of how can policies tackle the human dimension in this emerging hyper-connected era. I think that we have to realize, qualify and find words to characterize the change we are witnessing. And of course, once upon a time, we all know we had only the offline world, and then we have seen an online layer covering this online-offline world, which becomes more and more wide. But what happens today, to some extent, with the Internet of Things, the ubiquitous access to fast and broadband internet, is a moment where the online and the offline falls into each other to the point that distinguishing them is not really effective anymore. So we are always both on and offline, which requires really to rethink our human condition, because it impacts very heavily on interaction between ourselves, so for social interaction, to the following way. To some extent, this is the first time we come close to the moment where the Roman dicton, we say in Europe, you know, verba volant, scripta manent, to say that words fly and vanishes, so to speak, but things that are written stay. Okay. Now, by default, interaction will be sticky, will leave a trace. We all have a digital shadow behind us. So by default, things will stay. And if we want them to vanish, we'll have to construct this vanishing character. So that really brings us into, if I take this metaphor of gravity, we are changing the level of the gravitational force that we are experiencing, socially speaking. And our connection with the environment also is changing. With this connected environment, the fact that the environment is reactive and talkative, it will be much more difficult than it used to be to see the extent to which the environment we encounter is taking into account our own presence. So is it made up for me or not? What is the impact of my presence in this environment on the way I perceive it? So these things who were philosophical questions for a while now become common sense and common daily experience. So this is really changing, and it's going to change more and more our own experience as humans in this world. So yes, indeed, in policy circles, we see these two things flourishing. How can we ensure a human-centric technological development? And on the other side, when will robots be human? And to this, I say that the first thing is when we consider the Turing test as being a test to decide when robots will become human, it is quite problematic that fooling a human is used as a proof to confer to an object the status of being another human. So I think we have to be careful with this Turing test approach. And when we wonder when robots will become human, I don't know what Raja has to say about that, but I think it only says that, in fact, this question makes sense because we are thinking of humans as machines since a long time. So it's just a reflection of the fact that we think of human as machine that makes this question of when robot will become human so meaningful question. So I think that politically speaking, it is very important as we speak to notice that this question is ill-framed and unveil a bug in how we, at least in the Western part of the world, think about what it is to be human. So we need to revisit this definition. And instead of jumping to the post-human, you know, with a singularity hypothesis or with the post-human or conferring to object the status of human, for example, as some propose, I think it is really the moment where we have to go to a post-humanistic notion of what it is to be human. And to think about that, we have had someone in Europe last century, a woman, Hannah Arendt, who has thought politically the human condition in a way that helps us now redefine what it is to be human, politically speaking. So let me just very shortly say that we are still, in the modern framework, considering men as rational subjects. And when you see that, for example, being free is being autonomous, this is really a way to consider that the figure of man in political space is to be a rational subject. Just a side note that for women it's more difficult to embrace this rational subject figure because we were at the time that it was forged considered more on the side of nature than on the side of man then. But I think that Hannah Arendt provides us with the concept of a relational self that can substitute the notion of rational subject in the following way. A relational self is a self-anchored that is aware of the notion of plurality. And this notion of plurality is really interesting in this hyper-connected era. It is made of three characteristics. The first one is equality, but not the modern equality looked at from outside, like I see that two things are equal. No, the equality that we grant to each other. So this equality from within, this horizontal equality. Together with that, she said that what characterizes humans is that they are unique. If they are considered humans per qua human, as she says, you cannot be reduced to your attributes. So in that sense, the who that each of us is unique. And the third characteristic is that to know who we are, it's not that we control our identity and then we choose to engage in the public. No, we know who we are because we engage in the public and because we are recognized by others. And this was the idea of the Greek agora. So these three characteristics of equality, uniqueness, and relationality hold together in her concept of plurality. And I think that if we consider that we as humans in political terms are relational selves, that means we realize how much we are interdependent of others. This is something where men and women can recognize themselves. And I think that this is also a concept that accounts for both Eastern worldview, which insists more on relationality, and can bring Western worldview, who has insisted maybe too much on autonomy and control and avoiding relationship in term, and mixing the fact of freedom from being free from relationship. I think these two visions can maybe come closer to each other. And if you see that, again, in policy discourse, we speak a lot in Europe, I don't know in Japan, about transparency and control. And I think that transparency and control were means to ensure fairness to rational subjects. So it is if things are transparent, and if I am in control, then I can ensure I am treated fairly. Okay, this goes through, now in hyperconnectivity, what we experience is a loss of orientation, not necessarily because someone else, a big brother, is fooling me, an evil genius, Cartesian one, no, but just because the condition is changing, are changing. Indeed, we have sometimes the suspicion of fear of being controlled. We don't know when we are recognized and when we are, the impact of this recognition on the environment as it occurs to us. And we also have a risk of being over-solicited in terms of attention. If I'm always asked for consenting for everything, I will become mad. So I have a risk of over-solicitation for my attention, which is something really new that is occurring now and needs to be addressed again in political terms. So it's interesting to see that the word trust comes more and more in the policy discourse and joined to transparency and control, because transparency and control can be means to fool each other and are not necessarily anymore the benchmark they used to be when we were not in this information era where information was overabundant as it is now. So, of course, this is a huge work in progress for all societies in the world where we have to reforge the concept to attend the human needs. You may say, okay, all this is philosophy, no concrete things, but I think that it is, because if we don't manage to think of human more as relational selves and not rational subjects, the price of failing going through this transition is the loss of reality and meaningfulness. And just to give two examples, it could be what Jean-Gabriel Ganachia is calling surveillance. That means spending our time controlling we are not controlled, you know, or reply to all, a big mailing list, please stop. And then a lot of people do that. So you just generate what you want to avoid. So this is what will become our own experience if we don't shift the conceptually our notion of what it is to be human. So in a nutshell, and that's my last slide, I think we have to really think deep and avoid compulsive reaction. Each time we mention privacy, I think privacy is a symptom of an issue that needs to be thought, unpacked, and reforged. So we have to rethink, pay attention of how questions and issues are framed, not think that we can speak like we used to and continue the whole solution, because then we produce something which is often, which may be smokescreen and meaningless things, so I call this a loss of reality. And I think that it is a very good opportunity for a global conversation and other approach, because really there the Western and the Eastern view of the world can both bring a contribution to the, answering the challenge we have. So that's my 7 minutes, and I hope I...
Okay. Thank you very much. So let's move now to our second speaker, and we'll have a short question and answer session after that. Oh, okay.
So 7 minutes.
Yeah,
Go. Okay. So like Nicole, I'm going to be very practical, actually. And you know, I think when you talk about cyber society, I think everyone talk about like IoTs and robotics and AI systems. Okay, of course, those components will be there, but I would like to focus on the more on infrastructure, because the infrastructure is one of the places that will be heavily affected by the progress of the cyber society, because all the infrastructure is going to be sort of cyber, and that actually has a tremendous impact in the industry and the way we do in our daily life. So, you know, one of the things actually I'm really working on is the open energy mobility system. And you know, the question is like, we're actually going to go into the hyper-connected society, and everything going to be digitized, everything going to be connected. And that actually, the one advantage of that is extremely useful and optimized. And at the same time, there's a fragility, because if anything happens to that system, like we might have a complete catastrophe, and we might actually system may not work. Actually. So like, that's actually the danger of having a cyber society in an extreme end. So we need to be able to have a extremely useful system, at the same time very resilient. And so that's actually what I'm gonna I'm supposed to give a talk at the CNRS next week. It's like how we're gonna build the cities that actually optimal, sustainable, and very efficient, at the same time withstand the worst case. So like a worst case means like huge disaster, or like unfortunately we are undergoing a terror attack in Paris actually. All those incidents, like how we system withstand that unexpected major perturbations. And so this is like one of the things. And the other things, we have to be able to create a system, like a city or infrastructure that is sustainable and resilient, which I already mentioned, and enable the economic growth. So this three pillar is fundamental to the next generation's urban infrastructure or any of the infrastructure we're going to build into the future. Now, the specific project which we're actually working on, I think we need to, I think we need to have a very specific image to see, visualize. So like one of the projects that which we're engaging in Okinawa, jointly by the Sony's Computer Science Lab and Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, is the open energy system. That is a renewable energy system. That each house actually have, I think I have a video here. So each house, this is actually the family, faculty housing. Each house has a solar photovoltaic system, and each house has a lithium-ion battery pack. So they can actually generate and store the battery and then use it in the nighttime. At the same time, each house, each battery is connected by the DC microgrid system. So if you have a surplus of the electricity, you can't really charge it anymore in the local battery pack. That electricity will be sent down to the neighbors. And if neighbor has a spare capacity to store the electricity, they will store that. If you actually use up electricity so much and you need more, so neighbor can send you the electricity. So this is actually the pilot study, which is running for like almost 1 year without any downtime. And this is the battery pack you have. So this is what we call the energy server. It's a stack of lithium-ion battery, AC/DC converter, and then energy exchange module, which is just like a router system for the internet that actually decide to actually send electricity or receive electricity or send it to the household. And this is the DC grid line. So that actually, this is a private property. You can just like put up a grid system. So that's actually all connected to 19 families, 19 houses with the faculty family living. And sometimes like you actually have the exchange energy that area or that area, so autonomously changing. So this is enabled by the sort of like a more the cyber architecture because everything is digitized, everything is monetized. So that if there's a activity going on, a battery is a energy consumed, then we actually reroute the electricity. If you look at this, the conventional grid we have today, things is not like that. It's just sending down the electricity, and it doesn't really matter, how you do things. So this is why we do the kind of a new kind of cyber infrastructure because completely distributed, renewable, and very resilient. So, and actually, you can see how the electricity has been exchanged. So you see, like this is like the blue is how much you charged in the local, and if you have charge, this dot actually means that you're sending electricity around. Okay, so you are now actually actively sending electricity, exchange electricity. Someone use more electricity, someone actually have like feel the surplus electricity. So like this is like about noon. So Okinawa noon time actually the lot of sunshine. So like every household the battery pack full, and then after like now 2:30 and now 3 p.m. This is fast forwarding, and then some people they come back and then start using electricity, and then they start using electricity very quickly, and then okay, I need more electricity, and someone has surplus, just give me electricity. So that's like a bottom-up negotiation going on. So this is a kind of new kind of a bottom-up electricity supply system, which is function perfectly and a very robust system. Because we got the mode 1 operation, which is normal, just like network-wide operation. If we got some problem, actually we had the lightning hit, and I got some of the part destroyed. Then they still have a local exchange. If we ever things doesn't work, but they still stand alone. So like there's no downtime actually. So this is a very resilient system actually. Now, so what does this mean? This means the big change in the paradigm from centralized energy supply to distributed energy supply. It's just like we have like a TV station, movie theater, which is central supply, and just watching it. Or now we have like people just create your video and put it into YouTube, or send us things in the Facebook. So like YouTube, Facebook actually occupy 60-70% of our time, rather than the TV. So it's a big change in the centralized supply to distributed consumer-generated media. And the same thing happening in a hotel and taxi. So now the Hilton, the Hyatt, and those are the hotel provider, but now Airbnb, anyone can actually run and operate. A sort of a hotel thing, or or Uber is everyone can be the taxi driver if you want. I don't know if you want to do that, but like this completely changed in the way we provide the service, the consumer-generated service. What happens if this happens in electricity? What happens if we happen in other infrastructure? That would be a dramatic change. Then but something which is being discussed actually last month I was in Abu Dhabi for the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Conference. Is a big debate is in how we actually merge electricity and transportation system. So we're going to have an electric vehicle because the world we're going to increasing electrified. At the same time, we're going to have an autonomous vehicle. If you have an electric vehicle which is autonomously driving, things are going to change a lot because autonomous driving system vehicle will be a part of the energy infrastructure because that's actually mobile battery system basically. And because it's autonomous driving, and people actually has a less incentive to own the car, and people going into the sharing the car. So there will be a lot of common shared vehicle, which is transportation medium, which carry the battery. That means that the mobile electric power plants, actually. So if that happens and merge to the electric infrastructure, so we're going to actually have an extremely wider scale, multi-layered cyber infrastructure that enable to control the power, which is the people's activity, and transportation, that's people's movement. And how this can be optimized, or how this can help your life, or infringe the privacy, I think that's going to be a big issue because a big, gigantic distributed, autonomous system. And that's things are going to be distributed intelligent electromobile system. And you have a drone. I don't think I'm going to have show the video, but we have a little drone flying over everywhere. So I think things will be extremely well connected. At the same time, there's a risk, and then in terms of privacy, at the same time, infrastructure being so dependent on the digitized cyber system. And if anything happens, the resilience is going to be the key issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now I would like to ask our panelists to give maybe a short comment, 1 minute, about the first part of this session. So Professor Hashimoto, do you have any comment on these issues that were tackled?
はい、ありがとうございます。最初のニコルさんのお話で、リレーショナルセルフという言葉がもう少し詳しく知りたいんですけれども、これ質問です。で要するに自分自身が孤立している時のセルフとは違うということなのか、あるいは集団の中でないとセルフというのを定義できないのかというようなことかというのが一つお聞きしたいことなんですけど、もう一つ北野先生のお話についての質問を一つ聞きたいんですけども、今日お話しいただいたことはデータではもうすでに行われているというふうに考えていいのかということですね。でそうした時に私今教育をやっていて、ティーチャーとランナーがミックスしてどちらも供給して受け取るというそういうふうな教育に今変わってきているということがあると、そういうことがエネルギーでも起きているというふうに考えていいんでしょうかということです。
Thank you very much. So I would like to ask all panelists to speak, and after maybe some answer from the speakers. So Haja, can you give some comments?
Yes, thank you very much for these two very interesting talks. I would like to connect them, and to connect them with Hannah Arendt, who was mentioned and whom I'll mention also during my talk. There is a plurality and equality issue in Professor Kitano's presentation, because when we are going all to be producers, providers, and consumers of goods, energy, and so on, we are going to have maybe a different sense of plurality and equality among each other. And therefore, this behavior of sharing and depending on the others at the same time that the others depend on me, will it have a strong incidence on our social organization? That's my question and my remark.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Kukita, can you have a comment on these first two talks?
興味深いプレゼン、ありがとうございました。私が、ちょっと興味を持った言葉というのが、最初の、ニコルさんのプレゼンにありました、トラストという言葉なんですけど、世界が、このハイパーコネクトされた世界、そして、 たくさんの人が一つにつながっている、そういう世界においてこの信頼というものが非常に大事だと思うんですが、でこの信頼というのは私の非常に大きな研究テーマの一つでもありまして、どのようにすればこの人間相互の信頼というものを促進することができるのか。でこれは北野先生のご発表にありましたこのネットワーク化した世界社会インフラというものにおいても、おそらくはお互いに対する信頼というものがプライバシーの観点からも重要になるんじゃないかと思うんですが、このその信頼というものを促進するために我々は例えば技術者として人文学者としてどういったことができるのかと、そういうことを私は常々疑問に思っているんですが、その辺についてのお考えを聞かせていただければ嬉しく思います。
So let's have now answers to this question. So maybe Nicole first. Can you try to give a general answer of the
Right.
comments?
I think my answer can address the three questions. What does it mean really to sort of shift politically from the rational subject to the relational self? Is to keep in mind the fact that precisely we are interdependent. In fact, we have always been, but we tend to ignore it before, because in modern times, a good proxy for being free was to think we were alone, you know, and just not witnessing we were not. Now, because of this evolution of technology and the new affordances, the fact that we are relational and connected, saute aux yeux, as we say in French, jump to eyes, is obvious. You cannot put in denial anymore. So this is why realizing that we are happy not if we are just alone and disconnected and in control, but if we are well treated by others. This comes at the forefront of political needs when before it wasn't so much. So this is what I mean. A relational self is someone who knows that he cannot have eyes behind. When you have rational subject in mind, you think, okay, the progress will bring me total vision. There is an omniscience, omnipotent imaginary behind that. So, okay, I don't have eyes behind my head, but I will soon. No, let's acknowledge the fact that we don't, and this is what makes us human. Precisely. So we depend from each other, and we need to develop the modes of relationship that takes this into account. So sharing and the fact that is a strong incidence on organization, again, this comes now to the forefront. It was anticipated by philosophy, but not, it was put in the dark. So now we have to really recognize it, and this is why I like the fact that technology brings us to the moment where instead of seeking to be disconnected even more, we have to embrace connectivity, but then to see how we have to change our mind, our way to think, our way to behave, our way to treat each other, so that life remains something as nice as can be. And the last thing about trust, indeed, trust, I think, is necessary to replace transparency and control. And too often in Western terms, we use the word build trust. And that's a sort of leftover of modern worldviews, because trust is not something that can be materialized, it's only actualized. So that I like when you say the translation was mentioning promoting trust or enhancing trust. And I think that's much more appropriate, because trust is something that happens when it happens and can never be guaranteed through a process, so to speak. So, and we have seen this with Volkswagen and other stuff. So yes, trust has to be actualized. And what we need as people, actors, agents within the system is means to know, can we trust or should we double check sometimes? And so we will have to build this benchmark for being able to exert this trust. But another problem we have in the Western culture is that the Cartesian doubt has been transformed into a sort of generalized suspicion, that the rational subject thinks he gets to the truth or to trust only by starting to distrust. But again, that's against our common experience, and we have to change this worldview as well.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Hiroaki?
Well, yeah, I think I have three. First questions from Professor Hashimoto was actually, think in a data or the media, in exchange and distributions and in the consumer generated media is what's happening. His question is, it is actually happening in energy as well. I think it was going to happen. I wouldn't say it's happening now. I mean, it's the only thing that's happening is like someone creating a renewable energy going to the feed-in tariff, like feeding into the main grid system. But one of the reasons why it is relatively slow is energy industry is a regulatory industry. It's regulated by the government regulations. So unless you have a system, government legal system, and then all the stakeholders agree, things are gonna happen. And so, this idea of fully distributed energy system, I think it's most likely to happen somewhere in Europe and emerging countries like India or Bangladesh or Cambodia, or Myanmar, those places, or as the place which actually really have to go into the new type of energy infrastructure, Australia. Australia actually has a beautiful grid system, but the cost is too expensive now. So they want to actually detach the 1/3 of the population out of the grid if they can do it. So there are huge discussion going on out there. So those places, they might, this new kind of system, new kind of energy system is advantageous. So I think Japan will lag behind on this actually. So the second part actually interesting is the sharing economy discussions. So I think the things are going to change in the sharing economy is the one reason is not just the distributed, but probably the factor of, for example, automobile being autonomous. If an automobile is autonomous, you will not going to drive. So you're going to really get the sense of, okay, I'm driving this auto. So there's a less personal attachment to the vehicle. That's why you don't really care whether you own the vehicle or not, because it's a safely move around the place and that's fine with it. So it's actually attachment is more the function. So that attachment is going to be less and less to the object, like a physical substance. But I think that would be case in Japan, Europe, and probably in the US. But less likely that will happen very quickly in an emerging economy because, like, for example, India and those places, people want to buy things. People want to buy and own things, and that's a joy. So I think those places actually, this is sharing economy will come later. But like, very matured economy, people already have things, and people don't really have to have it anymore. So it's like, and then with this autonomous things, people have this attachment. And the last question about trust. I think this is interesting because how build up a trust and this how to connect society. I think it's still the same in many aspects. But let me take a devil's advocate here. Like they assume, okay, in a cyber society, everything is monitored and you don't have to trust anyone. So like trust, you need to trust in, for example, exchange. So like you need to trust for the contract, you need to trust for the financial exchange, you need to trust for like buying and selling stuff, for example, and then you need trust for like drinking a beer, but like that's more physical things because you don't want to be beaten by someone or something like that. So, but like if like all the commercial activities, you need to trust people because you want to be sure what you are getting is the right thing. So if you actually have all the detailed trace of what happened with the things you're buying, what's background, everything in details and unmodified, uncompromised manner, you don't need to trust people, but you can just trust the record. So so then in that case, for example, technology like a blockchain is going to be very important because that's one of the technologies that ensures that the trustful record and uncompromised and distributed manner. But of course, like that would be very challenging conceptually. I agree.
Okay, thank you very much for all these issues that you tackled. We have maybe a few minutes to get one or two questions from the audience on the first two talks and on the issues that were tackled. Does anyone want to start and ask some question? Otherwise, we can postpone also for the end of the session. Someone want to react immediately? Yes.
Thank you very much for your very much interesting presentation, Dr. Devandre. First of all, I'd like to send my deep sympathies to the terrorist attack in Paris right now. It's still going on, and please accept my sincere sympathy for you. So my question is, it's sort of related to your presentation. Of course, I'm Yokonita from National Defense Academy, and I'm giving lectures on the strategy of cyber warfare, so I always, I'm wondering, how I could promote trust, at the national level. But my question is more like sort of the argument regarding the data things, the data localization, what we have been discussing, among the EU countries especially, because I've noticed that the safeguard agreement was invalid actually last month, so that the US cannot send data, and you would not accept data from US, and you're gonna store your data among and within US states, and I think it's gonna affect very much, at a business level, maybe the national level, for the information sharing kind of things, and it would affect the external policies, I think. So, how would you, how do you see that, data localization kind of things, the requirements, from your own perspective? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nicole, you have some answer on this point?
Well, I'm not going to comment on this safe harbor, the difficulty it has gone through, but to bring that back to my level of analysis and of the sort of more conceptual approach, I think that it shows that big data is coming, and I think that with the big data world, it will be a sort of, sometimes people say it's oil, sometimes I think it's even air. What I think is that we are going to really an environment where we will be navigating within this data. They will be sort of everywhere. And that we will have in Europe, and there has been an opinion from the European Data Protection Agency, EDPS, issued in September, where they say that we need to think the principles through which we grasp this privacy issue. For the moment, they're essentially data control, data minimization, as you may know. That is, that every person as a data subject, and this is in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, has a right to control their personal data. And that when someone is processing personal data, they have to announce what is the goal of this processing, and once this goal is achieved, they should discard or not process further. What we see in terms of concept is that the big data world and making sense out of the data that are around there is precisely against the data minimization principle, because you don't know what you find when you start to search and making these analytics. So that's one thing. And data control, now that data are not only the data that are produced about you, but this is a trace you leave behind, this expression of digital shadow, I don't think that the word controlling my personal data is appropriate anymore. That we have to see. And also what matters is what happened with this data. If I'm asked, can someone use my data? Okay, I may say yes, and I do when I sign on Facebook, Google, or whatever. So there I've signed to this condition. But what I'm failing, and this is where I speak of a loss of orientation, is to understand how does this sort of come back to me in terms of dynamic pricing? How this profiling, for example, impacts the price that I'm given or offered? Or how does the fact that I have approved for letting this data going away, how will it come back in terms of, that's what I mean when saying, how can I recognize if I'm recognized, and this impact of this recognition? So this is in terms of a philosophical framing of the political question. And I think that that's why consumer policy, and now with the Digital Single Market Initiative, we're going to bring along consumer issues and not only data protection issue as individual rights. So we have to complete this approach. And that's what I would have to say about this safe harbor thing, is that it is a dynamic approach we have to find, and together with US partners and Japan, to see how both we respect these conditions and go towards a regime that makes sense for all of us.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it's yours, Michael. Do you have any other comments from the?
Just a short comment. I think in this issue, I'm kind of curious observer here. I have to look into all the details of this data embargo control policy, I would say. But there are reasons for all the big companies like Google, Amazon wants to have a big data globally, because there are some new interesting information coming out from there. And if you actually control that, what the outcome out there, will be unpredictable. I don't know whether Europe will benefit by controlling the data or lose something, because that data is not integrated into bigger data set. So I think that's very interesting how that happens. In Europe, I think it's large enough, but if there's a further fragmentations, I'm sure that the region that actually sub-fragmented will have a serious disadvantage, because all the new analytics from the big data analysis will not be feedback to that too fragmented regions. So they will not enjoy the benefit of all the data analytics. So I think it's very interesting to see how this happens, and whether other countries of the region, like Latin America or Asia or Africa, how they're going to react with the data policy, and what will be a global situations coming years. I think that will be very interesting to see. I mean, I don't think anyone know the outcome of this. Which way is better. That's kind of completely new, uncharted terrain.
Thank you very much.